Imagine, for a moment, the silence of an ancient temple in the wee hours of the morning. The stone walls, soaked in the incense of centuries, hold the echoes of thousands of prayers. Somewhere high up under the vaults, the flame of an unquenchable lamp flickers, and in this soft golden light, the frescoes on the walls seem to come to life. Among them is a majestic figure in warrior's armor, with fluttering wings and a flaming sword in his hand. His face radiates peace and indestructible power at the same time. This is Archangel Michael, a warrior of light, whose name echoes through millennia of human history. Greetings to you, my dear friends, in this cozy space of our nightly meditations. Tonight, we are going on an amazing journey to the origins of one of the most revered images in humanity's religious tradition. Write in the comments what city you're from and what time it is. Let our shared nighttime conversation bring us together, wherever we are. In the flickering light of a candle, a story unfolds before us that began long before the advent of writing. When people, looking at the starry sky, felt the presence of something immeasurably greater and brighter. The name Michael is not just a combination of sounds. It is a question addressed to the very essence of being. Mi-ha-el. Who is like God? Hidden in these Hebrew syllables is a meaning that has stirred human hearts for centuries. It is not a statement of equality, but a recognition of the incomparability of the Creator, expressed through the image of the faithful guardian who stands on the threshold between the worlds. Close your eyes and imagine the library of an ancient monastery. The parchment pages rustle under the fingers of a scribe, carefully tracing the letters by the light of an oil lamp. Somewhere outside the window, the wind rustles the crowns of olive trees, and the smell of ink and old leather bindings wafts through the air. It is in such places, in the silence of scriptoria and cells, that the ancient texts in which the name of Archangel Michael first appears were preserved for us. In the book of Daniel, written at a time when Jerusalem was going through some of the most difficult trials in its history, we find the first mention of someone who is called one of the first princes. Imagine the prophet Daniel, an elder whose eyes saw the destruction of the temple and whose heart ached for the fate of his people. In the visions that came to him in the quiet Babylonian nights, he saw a heavenly battle where light forces confront darkness, and at the head of these forces stands one whom he calls the Great Prince, who stands for the sons of the people. These lines of prophecy breathe expectation. In them resounds not only the pain of exile, but also the hope for intercession. Michael appears as a protector, as one who writes down names in the book of life, a mystical chronicle of human souls, where every righteous life is marked with invisible writing. It is interesting how this ancient concept resonates with modern thinking about the nature of information in the universe. Scientists talk about quantum states, about the possibility of preserving information in the physical vacuum. Maybe the ancient prophets, not having modern scientific language, intuitively felt the same deep laws of the universe that we are only beginning to understand. A warm breeze ripples the pages of ancient manuscripts, and we are transported to the age of the New Testament. Here, in the revelation of John the theologian, a truly cosmic drama unfolds. The author of this amazing book writes it on the rocky island of Patmos, where the Aegean Sea is quietly splashing against the shores, and the same starry sky that inspired the prophets of antiquity stretches overhead. In his vision, Michael appears no longer simply as the intercessor of the earthly people, but as the leader of the entire heavenly host in the great battle with the dragon. This battle is not just a mythological story. It reflects the eternal struggle that takes place in the depths of human consciousness, in the secrets of every soul. The dragon of the apocalypse is a symbol of chaos, of destruction, of that dark beginning that seeks to swallow up the light of creation. And Michael, with his army, is the principle of order, harmony, divine beauty, which does not allow the darkness to win. Imagine this battle not as a crude clash of swords, but as a confrontation between two cosmic forces. Michael's light is not a blinding flash, but a soft, warm glow, like the first rays of dawn that gradually disperse the darkness of night. His host are not rough soldiers, but beings of pure light, moving with the grace of a dance, with the harmony of the music of the spheres. And when the dragon descends from the heavens, it is not with a crashing crash, but as a natural consequence of the fact that darkness cannot long remain where true light reigns. It is interesting how these ancient images resonate with modern ideas about the opposing forces in the universe: matter and antimatter, entropy and non-entropy, chaos and order. Perhaps human consciousness has always intuitively felt these fundamental principles, putting them in symbols and images accessible for understanding. But Michael, in the Christian tradition, is not only a warrior, he is also a guide of souls, psychopomps, as the ancient Greeks called such beings. In the apocryphal texts, which were created by pious authors in the first centuries of Christianity, we find touching stories of Archangel Michael performing a ritual washing of the souls of the repentant dead before their entrance into the heavenly Jerusalem. Imagine this scene: the clear waters of a heavenly river reflecting the light of heaven, and the figure of Michael receiving each soul with infinite tenderness, cleansing it from the dust of the earth. These images suggest that death in the Christian understanding is not an end, but a transition, not destruction, but transformation. Michael here appears as a wise guide who knows all the paths between the worlds and can safely lead the soul through the mysterious realms that separate earthly life from eternity. In the apocryphal, The Virgins Going Through the Torments, Michael accompanies the Virgin Mary through the afterlife, explaining to her the suffering of sinners, not with the cold indifference of a judge, but with the sadness of a healer who sees the disease and knows the way to healing. These texts reveal the deeply human aspect of the Archangel's image. He is not a punishing sword of justice, but a merciful physician of the soul. It is interesting that Michael was often addressed as a healer. All over the Christian world, there are springs dedicated to him, the waters of which were considered healing. This is not accidental. In the ancient world, illness was often perceived as the result of the influence of evil spirits, and Michael, as the victor of dark forces, naturally became the one who could free from any form of spiritual and bodily illness. The rustling of the parchment pages takes us back to the times when Christianity was just taking shape, when the first Christians gathered in the underground catacombs of Rome to pray by the light of oil lamps. It was then that the apocryphal texts began to take shape, which, although not included in the canon of Holy Scripture, played a huge role in shaping the popular perception of Archangel Michael. Among these texts, a special place is occupied by the so-called apocryphal prayer to Archangel Michael, which has been copied and passed from mouth to mouth for centuries. This prayer is an amazing phenomenon of folk art, which reflects the deepest aspirations and fears of ordinary people. In it, Michael appears as an almighty protector from all troubles and misfortunes, from coward, flood, fire, sword, and vain death. Imagine a peasant of the 16th century writing this prayer on a piece of birch bark by the light of a torch. A winter blizzard howls outside the window, and the house is warm from the cooker and cozy from the consciousness that there is a heavenly protector who will not leave in trouble. For this man, Michael is not an abstract theological concept, but a living, real force that can intervene in his daily life, protect him from robbers on the road, from a fire in the house, from pestilence and war. This prayer, although the church authorities did not approve of its use because of some theological inaccuracies, nevertheless reflects a deep popular need for a sense of security, for confidence that in this world full of danger, there is a power that stands guard over human life. And although the text of the prayer attributes to Michael qualities that, according to strict theology, belong only to God, this mistake is understandable and human. In difficult times, people seek the most powerful intercessor they can imagine. It is amazing how this text has traveled through the centuries, adapting to new times and circumstances. In 20th century lists, researchers have found formulations already contemporary to them. And today, this prayer is sometimes circulated as Prayer for the President of Russia, a living testimony to how ancient spiritual forms continue to respond to the modern needs of the human soul. The warm wax of the candle slowly drips down the candlestick, and in its yellow light, we can imagine the countless churches and chapels that have been dedicated to Archangel Michael over the centuries. From the majestic Chudov Monastery in the Moscow Kremlin to humble village churches where peasants prayed to the icon of the Archangel for protection from hail and drought. Each of these temples is not just an architectural structure, but a living embodiment of faith, a meeting place between the earthly and the heavenly. Within their walls were prayers in the old Slavonic language, whose ancient formulas carried echoes of Byzantine liturgies and even more ancient rites of the early Christian communities. And so, in the silence of these sacred spaces, a marvelous world of medieval art opens up before us, where the image of Archangel Michael acquires visible features. Imagine an icon painting workshop in ancient Novgorod. Behind the small windows, the northern glow of a winter day shimmers, and the room is warm from the cooker and cozy from the smell of linseed oil and tempera paints. The master icon painter, whose hands are sanctified by years of experience, slowly and concentratingly applies thin strokes on a wooden board covered with levkas. Michael, in his performance, is not just an image, but a window into another world. The master knows that every color, every line carries a deep meaning. The red color of the Archangel's cloak is not just a beautiful shade. It is a symbol of his fiery, incorporeal nature, the energy of creation, which pulsates in every movement of his wings. This red color seems to pulsate in the golden flicker of the oil lamp, creating a sense of living flame contained in the colors. In Michael's hands is not the crude sword of a conqueror, but the fiery blade of truth, which cuts not flesh, but lies, not bodies, but illusions. And in the other hand is a marvelous object, which icon painters call a mirror. It is a transparent sphere in which you can sometimes distinguish the face of Christ Emmanuel. The mirror symbolizes foresight, wisdom, the ability to see the truth where the ordinary eye can only discern the surface of things. Imagine how this image was born in the minds of ancient masters. They lived in a world where the boundary between the visible and the invisible was much thinner than it is today. For them, angels were not abstract theological concepts, but real beings who could be encountered in prayer, in dreams, in visions. And when they painted an icon of Michael, they were not just creating a work of art. They were opening a portal to an encounter with a living spiritual force. The archangels' laureate robes, these rich Byzantine garments adorned with pearls and precious stones, speak of his status as a guardian of the King of Heaven. But there is more to these robes than that. They remind us that beauty in the Christian sense is not a luxury, but a necessity, a reflection of the divine harmony that must permeate all creation. The quiet sound of the brush on wood merges with the whispered prayer of the iconographer, and gradually a presence, not just an image, is revealed on the board. Michael's wings are painted as if they really can move at any moment, lifting the archangel into the air. His face radiates both power and tenderness. It is the face of a warrior who fights not out of hatred, but out of love. A defender for whom every saved soul is more precious than any victory. In later icons, from the 15th century onwards, Michael holds a letter of commendation with the inscription, "As Archangel, Michael, the terrible of the terrible heavenly forces, is the voivode." These words sound like an ancient formula, like an incantation that can summon heavenly protection. But it is interesting how the word formidable here does not carry a threat. It is the formidability of justice, the formidability of light, before which no darkness can resist. The soft light of a wax candle illuminates the pages of ancient chronicles, and we are transported to those wonderful times when heaven and earth seemed to be in constant dialogue. Medieval chronicles are full of accounts of miraculous apparitions of Archangel Michael, and each of these testimonies is a small window into a world where miracles were not an exception, but a natural part of life. Here is the ancient city of Colossae in Phrygia, where a pious acolyte named Archippus served in a temple dedicated to the Archangel. Imagine this man, a simple, humble servant who lit lamps, cleaned the temple, and read prayers every day. His life was quiet and measured, like the passage of time in these ancient places, where every stone remembered the footsteps of the apostles. But one day, the pagans, annoyed that the Christian faith was attracting more and more followers, decided to destroy the temple in the most sophisticated way possible by directing the waters of 2 rivers at it. Water is a destructive force against which human hands are powerless. Archippus could only pray in front of the altar of his temple, as the roar of the approaching water grew louder and louder. And at that moment, a miracle took place that would echo through the ages. The Archangel, Michael, appeared in all his glory and struck the mountain with his rod. The rock parted like the waters of the sea before Moses, and torrents rushed into the resulting cleft, flowing around the temple as if it were protected by an invisible shield. This miracle was so striking that the memory of it reached distant Moscow, where the Chudov Monastery in the heart of the Kremlin was founded in its honor. The soft whisper of the pages transports us to late 6th century Rome, when a terrible plague plagued the city. Imagine these ancient streets where legions once marched, and now death roamed. Pope Gregory the Great, that wise shepherd, organized a procession praying to heaven for intercession. And as the procession approached Hadrian's mausoleum, something amazing happened. Above the dome of the ancient tomb appeared the figure of Archangel Michael, who slowly put his sword into its scabbard. This gesture was full of deep symbolism. The sword of vengeance was being put away. Anger was subsiding. Mercy was triumphing over justice. And indeed, the epidemic abated, as if death itself had retreated before this heavenly sign. Since then, the mausoleum has been called the Castle of the Holy Angel, and to this day, a statue of the Archangel crowns it, reminding everyone of that miraculous day. In the misty air of medieval France, another amazing story emerges. A simple peasant girl from Domremy, Jeanne, whom we know as Joan of Arc, heard the voices of saints, among them the Archangel Michael. Imagine this young shepherdess tending her sheep in the hills of Lorraine, listening to the bells of a distant church ringing. At that time, France was ravaged by war, and there seemed to be no hope of deliverance. But Michael, as always in the most difficult times, did not leave his people without support. His voice, clear and confident, guided the girl, showed her the way, gave her courage. And when Jeanne moved towards Orléans, she carried with her not only the royal banner, but also the invisible presence of the heavenly host led by the Archangel. These stories may seem like legends to a modern person, but they reflect something very important: the need of people of all times to feel that they are not alone in this world, that there are forces of good that are ready to help in the most difficult moments. Michael in these stories is not a formidable judge, but a caring defender who keeps a close eye on human destinies and is ready to intervene when justice requires intervention. The warm air of a Byzantine temple is filled with the scent of incense, and we find ourselves in Constantinople of the era of Emperor Constantine the Great. Here, in the city that became a bridge between East and West, the traditions of honoring the Archangel Michael were formed, which later spread throughout the Christian world. Constantine, according to legend, saw Michael in a dream, and this vision prompted him to build the first temples in honor of the Archangel. Imagine these first temples, not the grandiose cathedrals of later times, but modest but beautiful structures where marble and mosaics created an atmosphere of heavenly beauty. One of the most famous temples was built in Mycallion, not far from the capital, where the liturgies of which we still hear echoes in Orthodox churches today were celebrated. A service in honor of Michael is a special experience. Ancient chants, many of which date back to the first centuries of Christianity, create an atmosphere in which time seems to stop. Archangel Michael. These words sound like a call, like a bridge thrown between the earthly and the heavenly. The 8th of November in the old style and the 21st in the new was a day of special glorification, not only of Michael, but also of the whole council of incorporeal forces. This feast was established in the 4th century at the Council of Laodicea, and the choice of November as the 9th month of the ancient calendar is symbolically connected with the 9 angelic ranks: seraphim, cherubim, thrones, dominions, powers, authorities, beginnings, archangels, and angels. It is interesting how the church fathers of the time simultaneously sought to regularize the veneration of angels and warn against extremes. Some heretics tried to worship angels as creators of the world, which was contrary to the foundations of the Christian faith. The establishment of the feast was a wise decision. It channeled popular piety in the right direction, showing that angels, for all their greatness, remained servants of the one God. In the Catholic world, Michael is especially venerated on the 29th of September. This day is associated with ancient traditions dating back to the Archangel's apparition on Monte Gargano in Italy at the end of the 5th century. Imagine this mountain, a limestone massif overlooking the Adriatic Sea, where Michael himself is said to have appeared in a cave, leaving his footprint on the stone. The cave church on Monte Gargano became one of the most important centers of pilgrimage in medieval Europe. Travelers from all over the continent traveled hundreds of miles to pray at the place where they believed heaven touched earth. These pilgrimages were more than just religious journeys. They became real cultural expeditions, during which ideas, art, and literature were spread. Another great center of veneration for Saint Michael was Mont Saint-Michel in France, an amazing fortress island that is cut off from the mainland by the tides. Here, amid the mists of Normandy, one of the most poetic temples of the Middle Ages emerged, where the architecture itself becomes a prayer to the sky. These places of pilgrimage created a particular geography of the sacred in medieval Europe. Saint Michael became not just an object of theological reflection, but a living force that shaped the landscape of faith, paving the paths along which not only pilgrims, but also ideas, cultures, and civilizations moved. The soft ringing of the bell takes us to the Coptic monasteries of Egypt, where the tradition of honoring Michael has acquired its own special characteristics. Here, among the sands of the ancient land of the Pharaohs, Coptic Christians commemorate the Archangel on the 12th day of each month. The 12th of June becomes a special feast of thanksgiving for the flooding of the Nile, the life-giving moisture without which life in the valley of the great river is unthinkable. Imagine a Coptic monk standing on the banks of the Nile in the wee hours of the morning. The water slowly carries its waters to the sea, just as it did thousands of years ago in the time of the Pharaohs. But for the Christian mind, this landscape is filled with new meanings. The overflow of the Nile is not just a natural phenomenon, but a manifestation of divine providence, in which Michael plays the role of mediator between the heavenly forces and the earthly needs of people. The warm smoke from the beam rises to the smoky ceiling of the peasant hut, and we find ourselves in the world of the Russian folk calendar, where each day of the year was marked with a special meaning, a special connection with invisible forces. The 21st of November, Michaelmas Day, is not just a church holiday, but the boundary between autumn and winter, between the time of harvest and the time of long waiting for spring. Imagine a Russian village in late November. The fields are covered with the first snow, which has not yet covered the black earth. A special pre-winter silence hangs in the air when nature seems to freeze in anticipation of big frosts. Smoke from the chimneys rises straight up in the windless air, and somewhere in the distance one can hear the ringing of a bell. It is the return from the last road of a coachman hurrying to the snowfall. On this day, peasants performed special rituals, many of which had their roots in pre-Christian times, but were reinterpreted in the light of faith in Archangel Michael. St. Michael's Day was considered to be the time when the spiritual world comes especially close to the earthly world. Therefore, on this day, they tried not to make noise, not to chop with an axe, not to weave, in order not to disturb the invisible inhabitants, among whom Michael was the main protector of the human race. In Polesi, where swamps and forests kept the memory of ancient times when the Slavs had just accepted Christianity, Michael's Day was celebrated from thunder. Michael, in the popular consciousness, became the lord of the natural elements, not a formidable tyrant, but a wise manager who knows when rain is needed for the harvest, and when a clear sky for the harvest. The thunder in his hands is not a weapon of destruction, but the voice of heaven, that announces changes in nature. It is surprising how Christian images and ancient archetypes are intertwined in these folk ideas. Michael, as the steward of the elements, echoes the Indo-European ideas about the god of thunder. But in the Christian context, he is deprived of that formidable unpredictability that was characteristic of pagan deities. It is no longer a spontaneous force, but a reasonable will, directed for the good of creation. In the south of the Slavic lands, there was a belief that Michael controlled the souls of the dead. This image is particularly touching in its humanity. Imagine an old Ukrainian grandmother who, on Michaelmas Day, puts an extra appliance on the table for those who have already gone to the next world, but whose memory is alive in her heart. She is not afraid of the dead because she knows that Michael is a good shepherd of souls who will not let anyone get lost in the afterlife. This day was celebrated for an easy death, not because they wished for death, but because they understood that death is inevitable for all living things, and it is better to meet it under the protection of someone who knows the roads between the worlds. This was a deep acceptance of the natural order of things, a wisdom that helped people to live without fearing the end of the earthly journey. The soft light of a smoking candle illuminates another amazing custom of St. Michael's Day, pleasing the householder. This little brother of the houseboy, according to folk beliefs, lived in the stable and took care of the livestock. On Mikhailov's Day, they left a treat for him: bread, salt, sometimes a little vodka, and to prevent him from mischief, they used to draw a strip of tar at the threshold of the stable and asked him not to cross that line. This custom reflects an amazing feature of Russian folk Christianity: the ability to coexist peacefully with ancient ideas about the spirits of nature. In the popular consciousness, the domovoi and dvorovoi did not contradict the belief in Christ and angels. They simply occupied another level in the hierarchy of spiritual beings. And Michael, in this system, was the supreme patron who made sure that all these forces served the human good. The quiet clucking in the henhouse reminds us of another strange and touching custom: hens' namesakes. On St. Michael's Day, an old rooster was sacrificed to small demons. This was not a worship of evil forces, but rather an attempt to propitiate them, to distract them from more serious intrigues. Michael, in this context, acted as a wise diplomat who knows that sometimes it is better to give the little buggers what they want in order to protect something more important from them. The rustling of linen fibers in women's hands brings us to another aspect of Michaelmas Day: the beginning of Kudalitsa, the time when flax and hemp are prepared for winter spinning. Imagine a Russian peasant woman who, during the long winter evenings, would sit at the spinning wheel, pulling thin thread from the koodle. This work required not only skill, but also a special mental attitude. After all, these threads would be used to weave cloth for family clothes, for the nappies of future children, for the shrouds of those who would complete their earthly journey. The beginning of this work on Michaelmas Day is not accidental. The Archangel, as the patron of human labor, blessed the undertaking that would last through the winter. In the monotonous rhythm of the spinning wheel, in the soft rustling of linen fibers, peasant women found a special meditation, a time to reflect on life, to pray, to pass on ancient knowledge and wisdom to younger generations. The light of the morning dawn penetrates through the narrow windows of the monastery cell, and we find ourselves in a world where Archangel Michael is honored as a special patron of monastic work. According to one of the ancient tales, it was he who appeared to the monk Pachomius the Great in monastic vestments, instructing him in the organization of a monastery for the community. Imagine the Egyptian desert of the 4th century, where the first monasteries sprang up among the sands and rocks, islands of spiritual life in a world that was still learning to be Christian. The venerable Pachomius, that amazing man who turned from a Roman soldier into the founder of monasticism, pondered how to organize the lives of people who had devoted themselves to God. And so, in the silence of the desert night, when only the stars testified to his prayer, Michael appeared. But not in military armor, but in simple monastic attire, thus showing that the true army is the army of the Spirit, fighting one's own passions, serving one's neighbors in love and humility. This image of Michael the monk is deeply symbolic. It shows that the Archangel's power does not contradict monastic humility, that true power lies not in coercion, but in voluntary service. Monks, following this example, became warriors without weapons, defenders without swords. Their armor was prayer. Their weapon was love. The smell of incense and the sound of church singing bring us to consider why Michael is called a saint. In the Latin tradition, the word sanctus means not only holy, but also sacred, set apart for divine service. Michael is holy not because he has gone through the human journey of suffering and redemption, but because he originally belongs to the world of divine light. This is holiness of a different kind, not achieved, but bestowed, not acquired by deeds, but inherent in the very nature of the archangelic existence. And yet, in popular veneration, Michael appears remarkably close to human experience. He understands human fears and hopes, because, according to tradition, it was he who stood at the gates of paradise with a flaming sword, seeing the exile of Adam and Eve, sympathizing with their grief, but doing the will of the Most High. The warm air of the church is filled with echoes of ancient chants, and we reflect on how the image of Michael spread throughout the Christian world, becoming the patron saint of cities and countries. Germany, Kiev, Brussels, the distant northern city of Archangelsk. All these places are connected by invisible threads with the name of the Archangel. Archangelsk is especially dear to the Russian heart. This northern city, which has become Russia's gateway to Europe, got its name from the Mikhail Archangelsk monastery, founded in the 12th century. Imagine these northern lands, endless forests, swift rivers, white nights of short summer and long polar winter. Here, at the edge of the inhabited world, the need for heavenly protection was particularly acute. The Pomors, those brave seafarers of the Russian north, prayed to Michael before long voyages as a protector from sea storms and ice. In their wooden churches, built without a single nail, the icons of the Archistrategus were painted especially carefully. After all, not only good luck in trade, but also the very life of those who set sail on the sea of cold depended on his intercession. Michael became the patron saint not only of sailors, but also of all those whose lives are connected with risk and danger. Police and military, Cossacks and paratroopers, all of them found in the image of the heavenly warrior, an example of courage combined with justice. It is not by chance that the Day of the Airborne Troops in Russia is celebrated on the 2nd of August, the day of the memory of Elijah the prophet. But many paratroopers also honor Michael as their special intercessor. Merchants also prayed to Michael, not only for profit, but also for honesty in business. In medieval towns, where shopping malls were often located next to churches, merchants realized that true wealth was not in the amount of gold, but in the purity of conscience. Michael, as the holder of the scales of justice, reminded them that all earthly matters would be weighed on the scales of heaven. The soft whisper of the pages of an ancient book brings us to a reflection on the book of life, that mysterious scroll in which, according to the prophet Daniel, the names of those who will be saved are written. This concept resonates remarkably with modern scientific ideas about the informational nature of the universe. Physicists talk about quantum states, about the possibility of preserving information in the structure of space-time, about the holographic principle, according to which all information about a three-dimensional object can be written on a two-dimensional surface. Maybe the ancient prophets, not having modern scientific language, intuitively felt these deep laws of the universe. The book of life, in their understanding, is not just a list of names, but a living record of all human deeds, thoughts, intentions. Each deed leaves its trace in the fabric of reality. And Michael, as the guardian of this book, sees not only external actions, but also the deep motives of the human heart. This idea is also in line with Eastern ideas about the Akashic records, that metaphysical library where information about everything that happens in the universe is stored. Different traditions, different cultures have come to similar insights that nothing in the world passes without a trace, that there is some higher memory that records and stores everything that happens. Perhaps in the future, science will discover ways of direct access to this information structure of the universe. And then, what we now call prayerful communication with angels and saints will acquire a new scientific understanding. Perhaps Michael and other archangels are not so much separate personalities as aspects of the unified information field of the universe, those facets of the world mind with which a person can enter into conscious contact. Warm wax flows down the candlestick, forming czar patterns. And in these forms, one can see a reflection of how human consciousness throughout the ages has created images that help to comprehend the inscrutable mysteries of existence. Michael, in this sense, is not just a religious symbol, but an archetype that lives in the depths of the human psyche, expressing the need for protection, justice, and connection with the higher powers. Psychologists say that archetypes are universal images that manifest themselves in different cultures independently of each other. The image of the heavenly warrior, the defender of the innocent, the judge of the righteous. All this we find not only in Christianity, but also in other religious traditions of the world. This shows that the need for such a patron is rooted in the very nature of human consciousness. But Michael is not just a projection of human desires. In the Christian understanding, he represents a real spiritual force that acts in the world, participates in human history, and responds to prayers and requests. This belief is based not only on sacred texts, but also on the lived experience of countless generations of believers who have felt his presence in their lives. The ringing of a distant bell reminds us that somewhere in the world a liturgy is being celebrated, where Michael's name is spoken, where people turn to him with their joys and sorrows. This continuous flow of prayer, which does not stop for a moment, creates a special field of spiritual energy in which the modern world lives. And there is swoop wisdom in this. Man cannot live only by material interests. He needs a connection with the transcendent, with that which is greater than his own limited life. Michael provides this connection, becoming a bridge between the earthly and the heavenly, between the temporal and the eternal. The soft light of the pre-dawn stars streams through the window, and we are approaching the moment when our night journey in the footsteps of Archangel Michael draws to a close. But before we say goodbye, let us plunge once again into those depths of human experience where the image of the heavenly warrior takes on particularly moving and healing characteristics. Imagine a medieval monastery hospital, stone walls covered with lime, simple wooden beds on which the sick lie. The air is filled with the smell of healing herbs, chamomile, St. John's wort, mint, which the monks collected in the surrounding forests and meadows. And on the wall, where every sufferer can see it, hangs an icon of Archangel Michael. Not a fearsome warrior, but a healer, whose hands are stretched out in a gesture of blessing. It was not by chance that people turned to Michael with prayers for healing. In the ancient world, illness was often perceived as the result of evil spirits, and who but the victor of the demons could free them from their ailments. But there is a deeper meaning in it. Michael, as archistrategus of heavenly forces, represents the principle of order and harmony. And illness is a violation of this harmony in the human body. Healing springs dedicated to Michael can be found all over the Christian world. Imagine such a spring somewhere in the Moscow region, a small wooden chapel built next to a spring that gushes from under the roots of an ancient fir tree. The water here is especially cold and clean, with a slight iron flavor. People come here not only for physical healing, but also for the peace of mind that gives a sense of connection with something big and bright. The quiet murmuring of water merges with the whispering of prayers, and in this soundscape, a special state of consciousness is born, meditative, peaceful. Modern science knows that the sound of flowing water does have a beneficial effect on the nervous system, reduces the level of stress hormones, and promotes recovery. Perhaps ancient people intuitively understood these regularities, choosing such corners of nature for holy places. A light breeze rustles the flame of the candle, and images of the future, the time that Christian tradition calls the end of time, appear before our eyes. In the Apocalypse, Michael appears not only as a warrior of the past, but also as a participant in the events to come. He is the one who will sound the last trumpet, calling all those who have lived on earth to account for their deeds. But how can we imagine the last judgment? Not as a fearsome judgment, where an angry judge pronounces sentences, but as a moment of great epiphany, when every soul will see itself in the light of absolute truth. Michael, here is not an executioner, but a wise physician who shows man his true state. The scales in his hands weigh not the quantity of good and evil deeds, but the quality of the human heart, its capacity for love and self-sacrifice. Imagine these scales, not crude tools of trade, but a delicate instrument capable of discerning the smallest movements of the soul. On one scale are all those moments when a person chose goodness, when he opened his heart to others, when he overcame his own selfishness. On the other are those moments when he closed himself off, when he preferred his own interests to the common good, when he turned away from the suffering of his neighbor. But even this image is still too mechanistic to express what happens at the moment of the soul's encounter with eternity. Perhaps it is more correct to imagine it as a meeting with oneself, but the true self, cleansed of all masks and self-deceptions. And Michael at this moment is not a judge, but a mirror in which a man sees the result of all his life choices. This understanding of the last judgment is devoid of horror and filled with hope. For if God is love, then his judgment is a manifestation of love, a desire to help each soul understand its true nature and find the path to healing. Michael, as the executor of this judgment, becomes not a punishing sword, but a healing force that helps the soul to free itself from everything that prevented it from being itself. The soft twinkling of the stars outside our window reminds us of the cosmic scale of the world of which we are a part. Modern astrophysics has revealed to us a universe of unimaginable size, full of mystery and wonder. Quasars and black holes, dark matter and dark energy, parallel universes and extra dimensions. All this expands our understanding of the possibilities of existence far beyond what people of past eras could have imagined. And yet, Archangel Michael does not lose his significance in this expanded cosmos. If the universe is really permeated with information fields, if consciousness is a fundamental property of reality and not just a byproduct of brain activity, then the existence of intelligent beings of other levels of organization becomes not just possible, but probable. Could it be that Michael and the other archangels are representatives of forms of mind that have evolved in directions beyond human comprehension? Beings for whom matter is transparent, time is not a limitation, and space is only one of the ways of organizing experience. Such beings could indeed act as intermediaries between different levels of reality, helping more limited forms of consciousness, such as human consciousness, to develop and evolve. This hypothesis does not contradict religious faith, but rather complements it by offering a new language to describe ancient truths. Prayer in this understanding becomes not just words addressed to the void, but a real way of communication with higher forms of mind. And miracles are not a violation of the laws of nature, but a manifestation of those laws that we have not yet discovered. The warm night air brings the smell of blossoming linden trees, and we are reminded that the summer of Archangel Michael is not only a time of church festivals, but also a time when nature reaches its prime. In the olden days, it was said that on Michaelmas Day, one could see angels dancing in the rays of the setting sun. Maybe it is just a play of light in the summer air. Or maybe it is a moment when the boundary between the worlds becomes especially thin. Children often see things that adults do not notice. Their consciousness is not yet limited by the rigid framework of a materialistic worldview. So they are open to perceive aspects of reality that older people are no longer able to discern. Perhaps children's stories about meetings with angels are not fantasies, but evidence of real contacts with other levels of existence. To a 21st century adult, it may seem naive to believe in angels and archangels, but think about how quickly our picture of the world is changing. What seemed like science fiction not so long ago, quantum teleportation, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, is now becoming a reality. Who knows what discoveries await us in the coming decades? Maybe science will discover ways to communicate directly with those forms of intelligence that we now call angels. The soft ticking of the clock reminds us that the night is coming to an end, and soon the first rays of the sun will touch the horizon. But the image of Archangel Michael will not disappear with the coming of day. It will remain in our memory as a symbol of the fact that there is always room for hope in the world, that the forces of good do not leave man alone, that justice, though not always visible, continues to operate in the depths of existence. In our complex, contradictory world, it is especially important to remember these higher principles. When the news is full of reports of wars and catastrophes, when it seems that evil triumphs and good is powerless, the image of Michael reminds us that there are forces that work to restore harmony and justice, even if their action is not always visible on the surface of events. This does not mean passively waiting for a miraculous intervention. On the contrary, honoring Michael calls each person to become a collaborator with the heavenly forces in their struggle for the transformation of the world. Every act of mercy, every act of justice, every moment when we choose good over evil, all this is a participation in that great battle between light and darkness, which constitutes the deepest meaning of human history. Michael, as archistrategus of the heavenly host, shows us that true power lies not in coercion, but in service, not in destruction, but in the defense of all that is living and beautiful. His sword is not a weapon of vengeance, but an instrument of liberation that cuts the chains that bind the human soul and opens the way to true freedom. The first birds begin their morning song, and we realize that our journey in the footsteps of Archangel Michael is coming to an end. But this is not the end, but rather the beginning of a new day in which each of us can become a little more like that heavenly warrior whose loyalty to goodness never wavered. Perhaps some of you, dear friends, after this talk, will take a new look at the ancient icon in the corner of the room, or stop for a moment in front of the temple dedicated to the Archangel. Or maybe just remember in a difficult moment that there are forces that stand on the side of light. And it is no accident that for thousands of years, people of different cultures and epochs have turned to them for help and support. May the image of Michael, warrior, healer, soul guide, become a source of inspiration and consolation for each of us. May his example remind us that true courage lies in the defense of the weak, true wisdom in the service of the good, and true beauty in the harmony that unites all creation in a single chorus of praise to the Creator. The stars begin to fade in the pre-dawn sky, but the light they symbolize, the light of eternal truth, beauty, and goodness, continues to shine in human hearts. And Archangel Michael remains the faithful guardian of this light, ready to come to the aid of all who sincerely turn to him. My dear friends, our night talk is coming to an end. Somewhere outside the window, you can already hear the first sounds of the waking world. The noise of cars, the voices of people, the ringing of bells calling for morning prayer. Life goes on, and every day there is room for small miracles, for unexpected encounters, for moments when the sky touches the earth. May your dreams be lucid, and your awakening be joyful. May the image of Archangel Michael accompany you in your day's labors and night's rest, reminding you that we are not alone in this big world, that there are forces of good that are always ready to come to the aid of those who live with an open heart. Good night, dear friends. See you in our next night journeys through the immense labyrinths of human history and spirituality. May your hearts keep peace and your souls keep hope for the beautiful future that lies ahead of us all.